So today we're going to continue our discussion of our three body systems. Today we're talking about the respiratory system. The main function of the respiratory system is for gas exchange. That means that it's providing oxygen to the body and removing carbon dioxide. It also helps to regulate blood pH by sort of exchanging the appropriate amount of carbon dioxide. We have a few different components of the respiratory system that you're going to have to familiarize yourself. Of course, we have the mouth and nose, and that can be broken down into a number of other components. We have the trachea, which is also called the windpipe, colloquially. There are the lungs and the components within the lungs, and the diaphragm, or the diaphragm if you're trying to spell it out. So breathing is a mostly involuntary mechanical action, and it's triggered by rising carbon dioxide levels. So what happens when you hold your breath is you're holding it, and carbon dioxide levels are increasing in your blood as your cells continue to perform cellular respiration. And so this increase in carbon dioxide tells your body, take a breath, take a breath, take a breath. And so by holding your breath, you are sort of overriding the automatic respiration. And so you can, of course, control your breath rate, so how quickly you inhale or exhale. So the process of breathing is called inspiration and expiration. So taking in air, not only oxygen, and exhaling air. We are able to breathe because of the sort of actions of our diaphragm, our ribs, and the pressure that it causes. I want you to take a deep breath in. Notice how your ribs move. Are they moving up and out or down and in? Of course, you would notice that they are moving up and out. Your diaphragm is also pulling down. What this does is it creates a bigger space in our lungs, and this space kind of helps to suck in the oxygen. There's a pressure difference between sort of inside our lungs, which is now low, compared to outside, which is higher. And so that helps the the air to come into our lungs because of this pressure difference. Now, when we exhale, the opposite is also true. You'll notice your ribs come sort of in and down, and your diaphragm relaxes, and so it pushes up, and we now have a smaller space, smaller volume within your lungs. So that means that we now have a higher pressure in the lungs, a lower pressure outside, and so together that air is forced out of our lungs and outside our body. The air that we exhale is high in carbon dioxide. The air that we inhale, well, it's atmospheric levels of the gases. So 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and small components of carbon dioxide, as well as other gases. So let's talk about the pathway of inspiration, or breathing in. So air is breathed in through the mouth and or nose. The nose has tons of little hairs and mucus. These are important because it can help trap different particles from entering your sort of airways, which we don't want. So this mucus and hairs, and these hairs are actually really important. The other thing that happens is when that air comes into your nasal cavity, all that space helps to warm and humidify the air before it goes into your sort of the rest of your respiratory system. To have air that is humid and warm By doing this, it helps to ensure that our lungs and other parts of the respiratory system don't dry out. So if we look at our drawing over here, the air will come in through our mouth or nose and down into our trachea. There are a few other structures here. Our pharynx is our throat, so just above our trachea, and our voice box is attached there as well, and that helps to create the vibrations which allow us to make speech. The one other part that I want to point out to you is the epiglottis. The epiglottis is a flap that prevents food from going down our trachea, or our windpipe. Fun fact, because of the way humans have evolved, we are the only creatures that can choke on their food. Now don't get me wrong, other things can choke if they eat something that is too big, but generally, to my knowledge, it's not going to go down their trachea. Then we get to the trachea. So as I've mentioned, the trachea is colloquially known as the windpipe. So the trachea is lined with mucus and cilia. Once again, this mucus and cilia help to remove any particles or sort of dangerous material from the air before it gets to our very sensitive lungs. Otherwise, the function is basically a tube to allow the air to flow into our lungs. So I've mentioned hairs, mucus, cilia, and those generally work towards trying to capture any particles before it gets to your lungs. Sometimes it misses, and the result of that is coughing or sneezing. Okay, so from the trachea, we are led into the bronchi. So bronchi are these two main structures here. If you're talking about one, you might see it written as bronchus. The bronchus then breaks down into smaller pathways called the bronchioles. Again, these are tubes allowing the air to come down and into the lungs. Notice, if you flip it around, it kind of looks like a tree. I think of the trachea as the trunk and the bronchus as the main branches and the bronchioles as the little branches on the tree. That just leaves the leaves on the tree. So the leaves of the lung are the alveoli. Here's another diagram of our bronchi. So we have our primary bronchus, and then it leads down into sort of other bronchus structures until finally reaching the bronchiole, and at the end we have little alveoli, which we describe as air sacs. Alveoli are known as the functional unit of the lungs. The reason being is this is where gas is actually exchanged. Everywhere else, it doesn't really happen. These are critical. That's where gas exchange happens. So as you can see here is an alveoli. There is a layer of cells separating other structures from the air coming in and out. And there is always a capillary right beside each and every air sac, or alveoli. The reason is, this is where gas exchange is going to happen. If you remember, all cells need to sort of accept oxygen and release carbon dioxide. Our circulatory system is what carries those two gases, and so they have to be in direct contact with our alveoli. Oxygen leaves our alveoli and goes into the hemoglobin of the red blood cells. In contrast, carbon dioxide leaves the bloodstream and goes into the alveoli in order to be exhaled. So these gases are always moving from areas of high concentration to low concentration. If you recall, that is diffusion. So oxygen has a high concentration in the alveoli and a low concentration here. So oxygen is going to move into the bloodstream. The opposite is true for carbon dioxide. We have a high concentration in the blood and a low concentration in the alveoli, so they're going to leave the blood and go into the alveoli, which is great because that's exactly what we need to happen. The opposite of that is what happens at the tissues, where tissues are low concentration of oxygen, and so oxygen is going to jump off the red blood cells and go into tissues. Carbon dioxide will jump out of the tissues and into the bloodstream. So if you recall from our circulatory system lesson, we had oxygenated blood going from the lungs, then to the heart. From the heart, it then gets pumped to the body. And so here we have it in the body where oxygen is going into the cells and carbon dioxide is leaving them until this eventually goes back to the heart and then the lungs. And that's our lesson on the respiratory system. Good luck!